I never thought the sound of a breaking bone could be so sharp, so final, like a branch snapping under too much weight. But that night, it wasn't a tree. It was my arm. And the hands that twisted until I heard the snap belonged to my father, the man who was supposed to protect me. When he leaned in close, his voice low and dangerous, he whispered, "I'll break your arm." At that moment, I believed him. Seconds later, I knew he wasn't bluffing. You see, people often imagine monsters as shadows lurking outside, strangers in alleys, faces you don't recognize. But what if the monster lived in your own house, wore the face of someone you trusted, and carried your blood in his veins? How do you escape a prison that calls itself home? I was 21 years old, an age where most people are chasing dreams, finishing school, falling in love. For me, every day was survival. Every sound in the hallway made my stomach clench. Every word from his mouth carried the threat of violence. I became an expert in silence, learning when not to speak, when to disappear into the corners, when to breathe as if I didn't exist. But on that night, when the pain shot through my arm and I realized the damage was real, something inside me shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it twisted into something else: determination. Because if I stayed, the next snap might not be my arm. It might be something that couldn't heal. This is my story, not just about what broke me, but about how I found the strength to fight back. And maybe, just maybe, it will give you the courage to face your own shadows. Before I take you deeper into that night and everything that followed, I want to make one thing clear. Telling this story is not easy. Every detail I share brings back memories I once tried to bury. But silence only protects the abuser. Speaking out is the first step toward reclaiming power. And that's why I'm here, sharing my life with you. If you've ever felt trapped, if you've ever doubted your own strength, or if you've ever been told you're too weak to stand up, then this story is for you. Because what happened to me was brutal, yes, but it was also the beginning of my transformation. Pain forced me to see the truth. Fear forced me to make choices I never imagined I could. And in those choices, I discovered a version of myself I didn't know existed. As you listen, I want you to do more than just follow my journey. I want you to reflect on your own. Ask yourself, what would you do if the very person you loved turned into your greatest threat? What would it take for you to say, enough? And if my words resonate with you, if they stir something inside, I ask for one small thing in return. Subscribe to this channel. Because every subscription means this story reaches further, maybe touching someone who desperately needs to hear it today. Together, we can build a community where no one feels alone in their struggle. Stay with me until the end. What you're about to hear will break your heart, but it will also show you that even in the darkest places, a spark of hope can survive. And sometimes, that spark is enough to set an entire life on fire. Home is supposed to be a place of safety, but for me, it was the opposite. The walls that surrounded me weren't just walls. They were cages that held in fear, anger, and silence. My father's footsteps in the hallway carried more weight than thunder. Every creak of the floor made my heart pound, because I never knew what version of him would open the door. Sometimes it was the quiet, unpredictable storm, his eyes scanning me as if I'd already done something wrong. Other times it was the explosion, the shouting, the fists slamming against tables, the threats that made my body shrink even before he touched me. Living in that house was like holding my breath every second of every day. When I was younger, I told myself it was normal. Kids at school talked about strict parents, about punishments and rules, and I convinced myself mine were just a little stricter, a little louder. But as I grew older, the truth became harder to ignore. There were bruises I couldn't explain to my friends, and nights when I stayed awake, listening for his return, dreading the sound of keys at the door. My mother pretended not to see. She kept her head down, busying herself with chores, cooking, folding laundry, anything to avoid acknowledging the storm raging in her own living room. I used to wonder if she was afraid like me, or if she had simply given up. The worst part wasn't the shouting or even the blows, it was the silence that followed. Those hours when everything seemed calm, but the memory of violence hung in the air like smoke after a fire. He didn't need to hit me every day. The memory of his threats, the knowledge of what he could do, was enough to keep me small, quiet, obedient. Fear became the air I breathed, invisible yet suffocating. I would sit in my room, pretending to study, but really I was calculating every sound, every pause in his voice, every shift in the house. Survival became my only subject. I tried to escape in little ways. Books became my refuge. When I opened a novel, I could pretend for a while that families laughed together, that fathers taught daughters how to drive, that mothers protected their children fiercely. Those stories felt like windows into another universe, one I longed to step through. Music helped too. I would press my headphones tightly, drowning out the shouting downstairs, trying to believe the lyrics belonged to me. For a while, I could almost forget. But the book always ended, the song always stopped, and the reality of my father's voice always pulled me back. Friends started asking why I never invited them over. I laughed it off, inventing excuses. The house is a mess, or my parents are strict about visitors. The truth felt too heavy to share. I carried it alone, wearing a mask of normalcy at school, smiling in pictures, acting like everything was fine. Inside, I was crumbling. The contrast between who I was in public and who I became at home was so stark, it scared me. Sometimes I wondered if I even knew who I really was anymore. Was I the smiling girl in class, or the silent shadow hiding in her room? There were moments when I caught glimpses of my father's humanity, and those moments confused me the most. A rare smile at dinner, a brief gesture of kindness, like buying my favorite snack or asking about school. For a split second, I let myself believe he could change, that maybe he wasn't the monster I feared. But kindness from him always came with a price, always followed by something that reminded me of the truth. It was like being given a sip of water before being shoved back underwater. Those fleeting moments of normalcy made the violence harder to process because they kept hope alive when I should have let it die. The night of the broken arm didn't come out of nowhere. It was the climax of years of escalating control. He had always been strong, intimidating, but as I grew older, I started testing boundaries. A small disagreement over chores, a refusal to answer a question the way he wanted. Each act of defiance, no matter how small, was met with force. He needed power like air, and any challenge threatened his entire existence. That night, all it took was me saying no. Just one word, and suddenly his promise, "I'll break your arm," became real. I remember the pain, yes, but what I remember more vividly is the look in his eyes. It wasn't rage, not the way people think of rage. It was cold, detached, almost methodical, as if breaking me was a task, not an accident. That realization hurt more than the snap itself, because it meant there was no misunderstanding, no moment of loss of control. He knew exactly what he was doing. And if he could do that to me, his own daughter, then nothing was off limits. In the days that followed, I wore long sleeves to hide the cast, inventing stories about clumsiness, a fall, a mistake. People believed me. They always do. The truth is, most people don't want to see what's right in front of them. They don't want to imagine that evil can live in ordinary homes. So they accept the lie, because it's easier than facing the reality. And I let them believe it, because telling the truth felt impossible. Who would protect me if I spoke up? Who would believe me over him? But something had shifted inside me, a spark I couldn't put out. Pain had woken me, and silence was no longer enough. I started to ask myself dangerous questions. What if I told someone? What if I ran away? What if I fought back? The fear didn't disappear. It screamed louder than ever. But alongside it came something new. The belief that maybe, just maybe, I deserved more than this. That belief was fragile, trembling, but it was alive. And once it was alive, I couldn't kill it. I wish I could say that realization gave me instant courage, that I packed my bags and never looked back. But the truth is messier. Change is slow, especially when you've been trained to obey, to shrink, to survive. I still hid, still lied, still played the part of the good daughter, but deep down, I was no longer the same. My arm would heal, but the crack it left in my obedience would never close. And it was through that crack that the light began to seep in, leading me toward a future I couldn't yet imagine. Shame is heavier than pain, and after my arm broke, I carried both. The The cast was visible proof of what had happened, yet I worked tirelessly to hide the truth behind it. People asked questions. Teachers, classmates, even strangers in line at the grocery store. And each time, I lied. I slipped, I said. I'm so clumsy. They would smile sympathetically, maybe share a story of their own accidents, and move on. Nobody suspected the truth, and part of me hated them for that. But another part of me was relieved. Because the moment someone saw me for what I really was, a girl living in fear of her own father, I would have to face it too. Keeping secrets turned me into an actress. At school, I laughed at jokes, raised my hand in class, and pretended everything was fine. I wore long sleeves, even when the weather was warm, and made sure my voice never trembled when I spoke. On the outside, I was the same girl I'd always been. But inside, I was hollow. Every smile was a mask, every laugh a performance. It was exhausting to live two lives, but it felt safer than letting the truth slip out. If I let anyone in, even for a second, the whole fragile illusion would collapse. My mother's silence was perhaps the hardest part to bear. She was there that night. She saw what he did. She heard the snap of my arm and the way I cried. But she didn't intervene. She didn't call for help. Instead, she whispered, "It's better if we don't make this worse," and helped me wrap the cast with extra fabric to hide the bruising around it. I wanted to scream at her, to demand why she wouldn't protect me. But when I looked into her eyes, I didn't see cruelty. I saw fear. She was trapped too, in her own way. And maybe she thought keeping quiet was the only way to survive. Isolation became my closest companion. I stopped spending time with friends outside of school, stopped answering messages, stopped making plans. The risk of being questioned was too high. And slowly, people stopped asking. They assumed I was busy, distracted, maybe uninterested. I could feel myself fading from their lives, becoming invisible. It hurt, but invisibility also felt safe. As long as no one looked too closely, no one would see the cracks. I thought that was what I wanted, but deep down, the loneliness was unbearable. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wishing someone, anyone, would notice. The worst moments came when my father acted like nothing had happened. He would walk past me in the hallway, calm and casual, as if the cast on my arm was just another accessory. Sometimes he even joked about it in front of others. "She's always been clumsy," he'd say with a smirk, and everyone laughed, including him. That laughter cut deeper than his hands ever could. It was proof of how well he controlled the narrative, how easily the world believed him. And each time they did, I shrank a little more until I felt like a ghost in my own life. But even ghosts can feel anger. Beneath the shame and fear, a new emotion started to grow. Quiet at first, then louder. It was rage. Rage at my father for what he did. Rage at my mother for staying silent. Rage at myself for pretending, for lying, for letting it continue. I hated that rage because it scared me, but I also needed it. It was the only thing that made me feel alive, the only thing that reminded me I wasn't completely broken. I began to cling to that anger, even though I had no idea what to do with it. The anger turned into questions, and those questions haunted me. Why should I keep protecting him with my silence? Why should I pretend everything was fine when it wasn't? Why should I carry the weight of his actions as if they were mine? The questions burned inside me, demanding answers I didn't have, and though I tried to bury them, they refused to stay quiet. Slowly, they started to shape the way I saw my world, cracking open the lies I had lived with for so long. One day in class, a teacher noticed the way I held my arm. She asked softly, "Does it still hurt?" I nodded, but before I could give my rehearsed excuse, she added, "If you ever need to talk, my door is open." For the first time, I felt seen. She didn't press, didn't accuse, just left the invitation there. And though I didn't take it, the words echoed in my mind for days. Maybe, just maybe, someone could handle the truth. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I believed. Still, the fear of speaking was paralyzing. Every scenario I imagined ended with him finding out, with things getting worse. My father's shadow was long, and it stretched far beyond the walls of our house. He controlled the narrative, and I feared what would happen if I tried to rewrite it. But the idea of change had been planted, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it grew. It grew each time I saw my reflection and barely recognized the girl staring back. It grew each time I heard my father's voice and felt the knot in my stomach tighten. It grew until silence no longer felt like safety, but like suffocation. And so, in the quiet of my room, I made myself a promise. One day, I would tell the truth. One day, I would find the courage to shatter the silence that kept me trapped. I didn't know when or how, but the thought of breaking free became my secret rebellion. It was small, fragile, but it was mine. And even though fear still ruled my life, that promise gave me something new to hold on to. A future where I was no longer just a victim, but someone who fought back. What I didn't know then was that keeping such a promise would cost me more than I could ever imagine, and that the moment to act would come much sooner than I expected. There's a certain moment when silence stops being protective and starts becoming poisonous. I felt that shift in ways I couldn't explain, like a pressure building inside me that threatened to explode. For years, I had mastered the art of keeping secrets, of tucking my pain neatly behind excuses and smiles. But the weight of it was suffocating me. The lies were no longer shields, they were chains. Every time I told someone I was fine, every time I laughed to cover up the truth, I could feel another piece of myself disappearing. And I began to wonder how long I could keep existing as half a person before I vanished entirely. The first time I almost told someone was during a late-night phone call with a friend. She had been asking why I was so distant, why I never hung out anymore. Her voice was full of concern, and for a moment I felt the truth burning on my tongue. I wanted to say, because my father broke my arm, because I'm scared all the time. But the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I said, I've just been tired. She believed me, or at least pretended to. When I hung up, I cried into my pillow, not just because of what I endured, but because of what I couldn't say. That silence felt like betrayal, of myself, and of the girl I wanted to be. There were small acts of rebellion, one so tiny most people wouldn't notice. Sometimes I refused to answer him right away. Other times, I locked my bedroom door even though I knew it wouldn't stop him if he really wanted in. Once, I even talked back, just a whisper of defiance, but it was enough to make my heart race for hours afterward. Each of those moments felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, terrified of falling, yet desperate to feel the rush of air against my face. They didn't change my circumstances, but they changed me. They reminded me that I still had a voice, even if I was too scared to use it fully. My mother noticed those changes too. Sometimes she looked at me with a strange mix of fear and admiration, as if she knew I was slipping out of the mold he had forced me into. One night, when the house was quiet, she whispered, "Don't push him too far. He's dangerous." Her warning was soft, but her eyes betrayed something else. Maybe hope, maybe guilt. I wanted to ask her why she never fought for me, why she accepted this prison, but the words stuck in my throat. We were both prisoners, and perhaps that silence was the only language we had left. The cast eventually came off, but the pain lingered. My arm healed, yet I felt weaker somehow, as if the break had left a scar on more than just bone. Every time I looked at my arm, I remembered the sound, the snap that changed everything. But instead of only feeling fear, I also felt anger. That arm, once broken, became a symbol, not of weakness, but of survival. He had tried to break me, and yet here I was, still standing, still breathing. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was proof that he hadn't won. And that thought kept me going on nights when I wanted to give up. Then came the day I wrote it down. I couldn't say it out loud, but I could write. In my journal, I poured it all out. The threats, the pain, the way I felt invisible. The words spilled like blood, messy and raw. But once they were on the page, they felt real in a way they never had before. Reading them back terrified me, but it also gave me a strange sense of power. It was my truth, unfiltered, unhidden. And even if no one else ever saw it, I had finally admitted it to myself. That was the first step, even if I didn't realize it at the time. But secrets have a way of wanting to be known. The more I wrote, the harder it became to keep it inside. I started noticing people who might listen. The teacher who offered her door, the friend who kept checking in, even strangers who smiled kindly in passing. It was like the world was full of cracks in the walls I had built, and through those cracks, light was trying to seep in. The idea that someone, anyone, could carry part of my truth began to feel less terrifying and more like salvation. Still, fear was a constant shadow. At night, I replayed worst-case scenarios in my mind. Him finding out, him punishing me, him destroying what little hope I had left. But in those same nights, another vision began to creep in. A vision of me leaving, of me walking away from the house that had held me captive for so long. It was blurry, fragile, but it was there. I could almost see the outline of freedom, and the more I imagined it, the more it called to me. That vision became my secret escape, the place I went to when reality felt unbearable. The breaking point came in the most ordinary way. He yelled at me for something small. Dishes not done, clothes not folded, it didn't matter. But this time, instead of shrinking, I met his eyes. Just for a second, I didn't look away. His face twisted in anger, and I braced myself for what might come. But inside me, something had shifted. I wasn't fearless, far from it, but I was no longer willing to disappear into silence. That moment burned into me like a brand, proof that I had reached a line I could no longer uncross. I didn't know what would happen next, or when I would finally break free. But I knew one thing with certainty. My silence had an expiration date. The lies, the fear, the secrecy, they couldn't hold forever. And when the moment came to choose between staying a ghost or fighting for my life, I would have to decide. What I didn't realize was that decision would arrive sooner than I ever imagined, and it would change everything. Fear has a way of shaping your life without you even realizing it. By the time months had passed since my arm was broken, fear wasn't just something I felt. It was the compass guiding my every move. I calculated when to walk down the hall, when to leave my room, when to breathe. My father's moods became the weather I lived under, unpredictable and stormy. One slam of a door could mean nothing, or it could mean everything. And the worst part was never knowing which. Living like that meant I never truly rested. My body was always ready to flinch. He started watching me more closely, as if he sensed the quiet rebellion growing inside me. My phone would disappear from my room and reappear hours later, always in a slightly different spot. He began questioning who I was talking to, where I was going, what I was doing online. I wasn't allowed to lock doors anymore. If I lingered too long outside the house, he demanded to know why. His control wasn't just physical, it seeped into every corner of my existence, leaving no space that was truly mine. The walls of my life grew tighter, and I struggled to breathe within them. My mother noticed, but she stayed in her familiar role, the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth the edges of his temper without ever challenging him. Sometimes she would slip me small comforts, like an extra piece of dessert or a whispered word of encouragement, but it was never enough. Her silence screamed louder than her gestures, and while I longed for her to stand beside me, I knew she couldn't or wouldn't. That realization carved another kind of loneliness into me, one that went deeper than isolation. It was the loneliness of being unprotected by the very people meant to guard you. School became my only escape, though even there, I carried shadows. I sat in classrooms with my hands folded neatly, pretending to focus while my mind replayed every sound from the night before. Teachers asked questions I couldn't answer because my head was too full of fear. Friends drifted further away. I let them. The truth felt too heavy to share, and the lies grew easier with practice. But sometimes, when I caught my reflection in a window, I hardly recognized the girl staring back. She looked tired, hollow, older than her years, and I couldn't help but wonder if that reflection was who I was becoming forever. One afternoon, a counselor at school asked me to stay after class. She said she had noticed changes, withdrawn behavior, missed assignments, the way I avoided eye contact. My heart pounded in my chest as she spoke. For a moment, I thought she might already know. Her voice was gentle, steady, offering me an opening I had been too afraid to take before. The words almost spilled out of me then, the whole truth, raw and unfiltered. But the image of my father's face stopped me. The thought of what he would do if he ever found out silenced me once again. I told her I was just stressed, overwhelmed by schoolwork. She accepted my answer, though I saw in her eyes that she didn't fully believe it. That unspoken doubt stayed with me for days, tugging at the edges of my silence. Meanwhile, at home, the tension escalated. My father's outbursts grew sharper, his patience thinner. He yelled over small things, dirty dishes, a misplaced book, the way I looked at him. Each outburst chipped away at the fragile stability I had built. The walls felt like they were closing in, and my journal filled with darker words. I began to wonder how much longer I could survive this cycle. I dreamed of escape, but every time I tried to imagine how, fear stopped me cold. He was bigger, stronger, louder. How could I ever win against him? But one night, after another storm of shouting, I sat on my bed and stared at my phone. My teacher's words echoed in my mind. If you ever need to talk, my door is open. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling. For the first time, I typed out a message to a friend. Not the full truth, but a crack in the wall. Things at home are bad. I don't know what to do. I deleted it 3 times before I finally pressed send. My chest tightened as I waited, terrified of what response might come. When my friend replied, her words were simple but powerful. You don't deserve this. Please let me help. I stared at the message for what felt like hours. Nobody had ever said that to me before, that I didn't deserve it. It was such a small phrase, but it lit something inside me, something I had almost forgotten. The idea that my life could be different, that maybe I wasn't broken, maybe I wasn't weak, maybe I had been strong all along, surviving in ways nobody could see. That message stayed with me, like a flame refusing to go out. Still, courage doesn't come in one rush. It comes in waves, crashing and retreating, testing your resolve. I wasn't ready to tell everything. Not yet. But I knew I had taken the first step. And that step changed me. My father's control felt suffocating, but for the first time, I had a secret he didn't know about. A secret that wasn't just pain or silence, but connection. And holding on to that gave me strength I didn't realize I had. What I didn't know was how quickly that secret would be tested, and how close I was to a choice that would define everything. The night I decided to speak the truth didn't feel extraordinary at first. It started like so many others, with the sound of his voice booming through the house, anger spilling into every corner. I sat on my bed, staring at my phone, my heart racing so fast I could barely breathe. Fear told me to stay quiet, to let the storm pass. But another voice, faint yet steady, told me this was my chance. I was tired of bruises, tired of silence, tired of pretending. I wanted more than survival. I wanted freedom. That night, freedom mattered more than fear. I dialed a number I had memorized long ago but never dared to use. 911. My fingers trembled as I pressed each digit, my chest tight with panic. When the dispatcher answered, my voice cracked. For a moment, I almost hung up, terrified of what would happen if he found out. But then the words tumbled out. My dad. He hurt me. I'm not safe here. Saying it out loud was like ripping open a wound, but it also released a weight I had carried for years. The dispatcher's calm, steady tone anchored me, guiding me through the next steps. For the first time, I wasn't alone. The police arrived quickly, lights flashing against the windows like a beacon. My father's face when he realized what I had done is something I will never forget. His eyes widened, not with shame, but with fury at losing control. Yet for once, his anger didn't paralyze me. Watching the officers step between us felt surreal, as though the walls of the prison I had lived in were finally crumbling. My mother stood frozen, torn between fear and relief. And me? I was shaking, terrified, but I knew there was no turning back. Leaving that house was harder than I imagined. The officers asked questions, and I answered through tears. Every word felt dangerous, but each one also set me freer. They guided me outside, past the threshold I had crossed so many times before, but never like this. The night air hit my face, cool and sharp, and for the first time in years, I inhaled deeply. It was the breath of someone stepping into an unknown future, one not defined by his voice or his fists. My hands shook, but I held on to that breath as if it were my lifeline. In the days that followed, everything blurred. Interviews, reports, hospital visits. It was overwhelming, but also strangely empowering. Professionals asked me to describe what had happened, and instead of hiding, I told them. My words were jagged, messy, but they were mine. And every time I spoke, I felt pieces of myself returning. It wasn't easy. Part of me wanted to retreat, to crawl back into silence. But once the truth was out, there was no way to shove it back inside. I had crossed a line, and the only direction left was forward. My mother and I had long, painful conversations. She cried, confessing her fear, her guilt, her years of silence. I wanted to blame her, to scream at her for leaving me unprotected. But looking at her, I saw a woman who had been just as broken, just as trapped. Her survival had been silence, while mine became rebellion. We were both victims, though in different ways. Understanding that didn't erase the pain, but it allowed us to start building something fragile: trust. For the first time, I felt like we might not just survive, we might heal. Healing, though, wasn't simple. Nights were still hard. I woke up shaking, convinced I heard his footsteps in the hallway. Loud noises made me flinch, shadows made me uneasy. The scars inside me were deeper than any bruise, and therapy became the place where I began to untangle them. Sitting in that office, speaking to someone who didn't judge, didn't silence me, felt terrifying at first. But over time, I began to find my voice again. Each session was like reclaiming a part of myself I thought I had lost forever. I also reconnected with people I had pushed away. Friends who thought I had abandoned them learned the truth, and their responses surprised me. Instead of pity, I found compassion. Instead of judgment, I found love. Slowly, I began to realize that isolation had been another form of his control, and breaking it was an act of defiance. Community became a balm for my wounds, reminding me that the world wasn't as cruel as I once believed. There were people willing to hold me up when I couldn't stand on my own. Looking back, I see now that the hardest part wasn't the pain or even the fear. It was believing I deserved better. For so long, I had accepted his control as my reality, convinced there was no way out. But once I chose to speak, the world shifted. It didn't erase the past, but it opened the door to a future I hadn't dared to imagine. A future where my worth wasn't defined by his hands or his threats. A future where I could finally breathe without fear. And yet, even as I write this, I know my journey isn't over. Healing isn't a straight path. It's messy, filled with setbacks and victories. But I also know this: silence no longer owns me. My voice, once stolen, is mine again. And with that voice, I will keep telling my story, not just for myself, but for anyone still trapped in their own silence. Because somewhere, another girl is staring at her phone, wondering if she's strong enough to ask for help. I want her to know she is. Because if I could break free, so can she. And that truth changes everything. Telling this story has not been easy. Each word I've spoken has carried me back into the darkness I once lived in, into the nights where silence felt like the only shield I had. But as painful as it is to revisit, it is also a reminder of how far I've come. I am no longer the girl who trembled at footsteps in the hallway, no longer the daughter who believed fear was love. I am a survivor, and survival is just the beginning. The truth is, healing doesn't come overnight. It doesn't come simply because you leave the house, or because someone finally steps in to protect you. Healing is slow, fragile, and unpredictable. There are still days when I wake up afraid, when memories pull me back, when I question if I'll ever be fully free. But then there are also days when I feel strong, when I laugh without fear, when I look in the mirror and recognize the woman staring back at me. Those days are proof that progress is possible. They remind me that pain does not define me. Resilience does. I share this not to shock, not to dwell on what was broken, but to show what can be rebuilt. Because if my voice can reach you, maybe it can also reach the part of yourself you've hidden away. Maybe it can remind you that no matter how deep the shadows, there is always a spark waiting to ignite. My father thought breaking me would silence me forever. Instead, it gave me the fire to speak louder than ever before. That fire is why I'm here, telling you my story. And I want to say this directly: if you are living in silence, you are not alone. I know how heavy the weight feels, how impossible the escape seems. I know the shame, the fear, the nights spent convincing yourself it's better to endure than to risk speaking out. But I also know this: your life is worth more than fear. Your story deserves to be told. And there are people out there willing to listen, to believe you, to stand beside you when you finally take that first step. The moment I chose to break my silence, everything changed. Not instantly, not perfectly, but profoundly. The world opened in ways I never thought possible, and even though the scars remain, they no longer define me. What defines me now is choice. The choice to survive, to heal, to live on my own terms. And that choice is available to anyone, even when it feels out of reach. If my words have touched you, if they have made you reflect on your own shadows or on someone you love, then I ask you for something simple. Subscribe to this channel. Every subscription helps this story travel further, reaching people who may be standing where I once stood, in silence, in fear, wondering if they're strong enough to speak. Together, we can build a space where stories like mine aren't hidden, but shared. A space where survival is celebrated, where hope is real, and where no one has to face their battles alone. This is more than a story. It's a promise that pain can be transformed into power, that silence can be broken, and that even in the darkest places, hope can survive. I've walked through that darkness, and I've found my way to the other side. And now I want to walk beside you, wherever you are in your journey. So stay with me. Share your strength, take mine, and let's keep moving forward together. Because our voices are louder than fear, and together they can change everything.